is Jessica Crow. I'm the founder of Apogee and the host of Change Leader Insights. And this is a special episode. I'm so excited because I have here with me Bill Kirst, who I met through LinkedIn, and I'll share the story in just a moment. But a little bit about him. So Bill Kirst is an author, poet, podcast host, tech leader, and one of LinkedIn's top thought leadership voices on change management. And I believe that. And I know that to be true because I shared a post, I don't know, a couple months ago, and was sharing that I was stumped on a podcast that I was on. And the reason was the guest, or the host rather, had asked me, hey, do you have examples of when change management has gone well, or companies that have done change well? And I had some ideas of companies that have gone through transformations and succeeded. But when we really talked about that, that experience, that employee experience, that stakeholder experience, I wasn't completely certain. And then Bill commented on my post, reached out and was like, I actually have a great example. So I wanted to be able to share this with the world because we need more positive examples. We need more studies on when change management happens in an organization, when change goes well. So before we get to that story, Bill, thank you again for reaching out, for making that connection, and for sharing your story today. But can you tell everyone a little bit more about who you are, how you got to where you are, and then we'll get into this great use case of change management going right versus not.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Jessica, for the warm welcome and the opportunity to join you today. Yeah, as you mentioned, I've been leading change for somewhere between 20, 25 years. And in my career, I've worked in all sorts of industries: consulting, higher ed, nonprofit, now high tech. And I've had the opportunity to really focus on the people side of change. So there's a tremendous amount of technology and process and policy that comes across our desks every day. But the unique part of my job for so many years is I've been able to focus on the people, focus on the humans, focus on the hearts, because what we do is we change hearts and minds. And it usually starts with changing the hearts, not so much the minds. So it's been a journey. And I make it a point to share a lot of the good, the bad, and the otherwise. Leading change is not for the faint of heart. It's very much a team sport. And I've kind of been driven by it my entire life. I grew up and had a lot of change growing up, moved around the world. I was in the military for 12 years. So I don't really know a world that hasn't had a lot of change in it. And as a result, I find it kind of an honor and a gift to be able to work alongside people and usher them through change. So that's what got me to where I'm at today. And I'm excited to connect with you and share some stories. And I'm really glad you posted that question on LinkedIn. I mean, I think one of the things that we're lacking a little bit on LinkedIn these days is the authentic, genuine engagement. So much of it, I feel, has been taken over by automation and AI and things of that nature. So I really like it. And it stood out to me that this is not only a real human, but a real human asking a real question. And so I was honored to answer, and I'm glad we connected.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for that. I appreciate the kind words, and I'm glad that resonated because I was truly wondering if there were stories out there, and there was a lot of feedback of people agreeing like, hey, I feel that way too, or I've had that experience of a transformation being successful, but the definition of success was, did we implement the technology? And I don't think that's actually the definition of success that many leaders or organizations would check the box on. So your reply was, I'm not going to say an anomaly, but there are fewer great examples. And I think we have to unpack that a little bit too. But before we do that, let's talk about this use case. Let's talk about this experience you had where you had a client, a company that you were working with, and how started the experience, how you started the engagement, and what led to that experience of the change going really well. Not just they did it, they completed the initiative, but it was a great experience for the people that were involved.
Yeah, I'm honored to share because it's a group of people that I really enjoyed working with. It was in my consulting days. So I was overseeing 2 clients at the time. And interestingly, both of those clients were in an area called agricultural lending. So those that probably know financial services, and I worked in financial services for a long time, it's a unique part of that industry because it's lending and financial services, but specifically for agricultural partners or those that have farms. And it's a unique it's a unique segment and market. And I encourage people to look into that, because one of the things I learned along the journey with them was there's so much that we don't understand about how even food gets from a farm to our table and how much goes into it, and how there's this ecosystem within a microeconomy, within a microeconomy, within a microeconomy. And so the two clients I was working with at the time were both going through large financial and technology transformation. They were changing out their systems about how they measure revenue, how they do sales, how they connect with customers.
Mm.
And these customers could be everyone from a small farm to a large farm, to those that actually build the equipment that people use on farms, those that harvest the seeds that grow things. And so it really was kind of a fascinating ecosystem. And I think what made it unique at the time was not only the timing, because I started working with them right before the pandemic hit. And as you can imagine, like most consultants and client relationships, I was on site with them, which was really, really important to build that relationship of trust. And these cultures are very unique in the sense that community means a lot to them. I mean, if any listeners had the opportunity to either be in agriculture or work in agriculture, you know that it literally lives and dies on relationships and trust. And I think the other part that made it really unique is this is a group of people that, just by the way they were raised, they're used to adversity. They're used to uncertainty. Change is sort of in their blood, right? I mean, you could be planning for a crop and then all of a sudden some weather pattern happens and change is introduced and you have to react and respond.
Yeah.
Preserve the crop, preserve your family, preserve your income. And so I think this was a group of people that were not strangers to change. And as a result, we started there and said, let's build from what we know, which is positive intent and trust. And then the pandemic hit, and we realized that we were going to have to change the way they did all their technology. Everybody went remote. We have to continue the implementation of what we were putting in place, and we couldn't see each other. And I think what was really unique and fascinating about my experience with them was every morning we would log on to a call, and we started in this place of the world is pretty much falling apart and there's so much that we cannot control in that realm. What can we control now, here, today, with each other? And one of the things that I felt to be really distinct about it was I looked forward to going on those calls every morning.
Which is also like that in itself.
Because it was this sort of sacred place where we all met each other where we were at, right? We understood that everybody had unique situations at home. Everybody had their own fears, but in many ways we had common fears and we had common hopes, and it allowed us to just keep going, right? What is the next logical action? Not next best action, but next logical action. And before we knew it, we were actually getting quite a bit of momentum. And the thing that really stood out to me was, in all of my years of implementing large technology systems, I've never really had one that went live over a weekend, fully remote and fully successful. And this one particular client that we worked with, we knew we were at that sort of cutover. We have to cut over all the systems, hope everything goes right. And I remember very uniquely what they decided to do from a culture standpoint. They said, well, we know there's going to be hundreds of people working the weekend to try and get us to a place of success on Monday morning. They made a point to order food and send it to the homes of the people who were working all weekend. And so there I was, supporting the communications and the training and all of the adoption stuff that we typically do. And then a pizza arrives, and then a fruit basket arrives. And I thought, wow, like this is something that people didn't have to do, but they really wanted to, make sure that you were fed, two, that your family knew they appreciated the time that you were giving up for them on the weekend. And three, that we could all sort of, in a communal way, even though that we weren't together, it reminded me of the power of, if we were together, we would be sitting around a table. We would be eating together. We would be breaking bread together. And that was a beautiful way for them to say, if we can't do it in person, we're going to do it the best we can remote. And that was such a boost of morale that I think we all worked through the weekend with a smile on our face. And Monday morning, we turned on all those systems and everything was fine. And
Everything worked.
everything
Yeah.
worked. And I was a little bit surprised and almost shocked because I've seen how, in other industries, it hasn't gone that well, but people trusted each other. People trusted the work, they trusted the process, and they trusted the intent. And that is what stood out to me, unique to that culture, unique to that industry. And as a result, we were kind of joking before, I don't have a lot of swag from former clients, but behind me, there are two hats that hang, both from those clients that have their
Yeah.
logo on there. And I'm still very proud of the work that we did with them. I'm in touch with them still to this day. They're wonderful people, and it was a unique culture to be in. And so that's the example I shared with you, was those two organizations in agricultural lending. They're made up of really amazing humans. And I think if you start with a place of positive intent and you have the desire to leave the world better than you found it, I think you can go through any transformation and leave it, and let's break that statistic that we always hear about in that one McKinsey report that is so
Dear God,
wrong,
can we please? Yeah.
that says 90% of these things don't go well or they fail. I don't think that's necessarily true. We just have to change our intent.
Yeah. So many amazing sound bites from that story and lessons learned. And the fact that you did this all while experiencing the pandemic, that in itself is a major transformational change. And you still led successfully and contributed to a major transformational change that went well, from culture and people and trust and the support and the engagement and how you felt cared for. I think those are things that we can take away. So you've had this incredible experience and use case that's in your heart and in your mind forever and ever now. You can't replace that. As you have encountered other clients since that time or have worked in other organizations, are there a couple of things that you've tried to pull into that experience, recognizing that the culture may be different or the key players are obviously different? How have you been able to perpetuate that experience in some form or fashion? And if you haven't been able to, what do you think the key hurdles are for organizations? Because to your point, that McKinsey study continues on, even though it's not accurate or even true. And
Yeah.
so how do we what are your so I guess part one is, what have you been able to carry with you from that experience and new environments that's worked for you? And then the trust and intent, I think that's a big piece of how we can potentially evolve moving forward. But what barriers do you see
Yeah.
as a part of that?
I think one of the things that I pull forward from that experience, and again, this is what's pretty unique about the time that it was in, again, within the pandemic. I think we all met each other, as I discussed, where we were at. So every
Yeah.
morning we would kind of show up in this place of vulnerability, uncertainty, but also care.
Hmm.
So we started from a place of care. We started off meetings by asking, "Hey, Jessica, how are you this morning?" Not sort of like this big "how are you" as if you have to answer in a perfect way and you can't say, having a tough morning.
Hmm.
We would almost make it bite-sized. How are you this morning?
Hmm.
How is your family this morning? And it seems like those things are kind of informalities, or maybe they're ways to warm up in a meeting. But in truth, what I learned with that particular experience was, until you know that somebody is truly, one, safe,
Hmm.
two, secure, and sort of three, in a place where they're able to brainstorm and ideate and almost innovate, you can't ask them really to do much. We've learned this about our bodies and our brains, is that the executive function, the sort of prefrontal cortex, it goes offline in any situation where it feels that sort of fight, flight, or freeze, right? It's just offline. And if you think about it, every morning we woke up and we were in that state of fight, flight, or freeze, just because we didn't know so much about the world. And so I think what we did is we started every meeting in this place of, "How are you?" And
Hmm.
mean it, like mean it. Don't just
Hmm.
say it, but mean it. And be prepared for the opportunity that somebody might say, "I'm having a really tough morning." And then be able to pivot. Like, there were so many times that we'd say, "You know what, Jessica, hey, we were going to talk through like the training curriculum today, but it's a big spreadsheet. It's kind of heady. Like, I'm not sure this is the right thing to talk through today because there's a lot going on. Would you rather we talk about that later this week?" And you would say, "Yeah, actually, that would be really great. But what I would like to talk about is maybe the branding. The branding is going to give me, some hope and some joy this morning. Can we talk about that? Absolutely. And so we just swapped it right there. So I think sometimes what I do now is I actually ask people, I give them the option. I just kind of say, how are you feeling today? Give them a menu of things that we could talk about, right? Because there's always a menu of things in change.
Right.
And let them pick, right? We still have to get through it, but like let them pick and let them be honest about the level of maybe depletion they have or the desire for creativity. They could be feeling that, right? I want to be really creative today. Or in some cases, they'll say things like, hey, I had to make a ton of decisions on the last steerco call or governance call. I don't want to make any decisions. Can we just brainstorm? Absolutely, no problem. Or vice versa. I just came from this meeting where no decisions were made. I'd like to make a decision. Great. Let's make a decision. So if you can give that menu to people that allows them to not only get things done, but also nourish.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Wow.
You look down and you've got so much done along the way. And I think the other part of it is that we have to remember that beyond these screens, way beyond these microphones, we're humans. And if we can understand each other in a more humane way, I think it helps with all the work. So asking someone how they are and meaning it and being open to the response and graceful, right? Grace is a wonderful word. I think we introduced a lot of grace during that time. I fear that we've forgotten a little bit of that since we've snapped back into old habits, but wherever possible, I introduce grace in any meeting, any engagement I can, because I feel like it's just a down payment on trust.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And what you just described too is very accessible. I mean, you're not, the recommendations anyone can do. It just takes thought and intention and doing it. And that ends up being the hard part. I mean, you mentioned we may have lost some of that potential for caring, or, some of it has to do with time, desire to get things done and an agenda, but we lose everything that you're describing actually in the way that I'm hearing you say it and how I'm seeing it play out based on what you've described is that you're aligning with the energy that's happening in that space. And that is where you're going to find the productivity, is when you're meeting that energy with what needs to happen. So I love asking and showing true caring. I love the idea of providing options to align with that energy. And those are very accessible, and that creating that foundation of trust. I do think that is missing in a lot of organizations, kind of pivoting to the idea of barriers. Aside from the obvious, what might be what else is getting in our way, right? Like, why can't we do this consistently in every experience that we have?
I think our calendars are getting in our way. I'll be very honest and very frank. Our calendars are leading us. We're not leading our calendars. And I think it requires a bit of courage to be able to decline something for the right reasons, to say, I'm going to trust my team to take that meeting and then let me know what I need to know. Or in some cases, I now follow a lot of meetings. So in Outlook, you have the feature to follow, which means I'm not going to be at the meeting, but if the meeting is recorded, I'll get the notes, I'll get the summaries and all of that. Similarly, I think AI is getting in our way. I am very concerned about the fact that AI has been introduced, and yes, it does the note summary, and yes, it does the action items and all of that. But the part that I am concerned about is if I have a question, I rely on the AI summary notes to answer that question. And what is missing, Jessica, is context.
Totally.
And I've seen it happen now a number of times where the meeting notes just sort of get copied and pasted into a chat, lacking all of that context. It may provide you an answer. It doesn't provide you the answer. And so now I may be looking at it saying, well, I did have a question for Jessica, but these notes were pasted in there, and it sort of answers part of the question, but I have another question. Like, I'm more interested in the question that comes after the question, or the question that comes after you've answered the question. And unintentionally, that all feels shut down now.
Because of, yeah.
And
it's
so
check out the notes.
Check out the notes, right? Go listen to the recording, check out the notes, listen to it on 1x speed. All of that's fine, but if it's actually taking the chance away from me of picking up the phone and talking to you or talking to a peer, to me, that's detrimental. And I know that people will say things every day they'll say, well, I didn't want to bother you.
Mm.
And I hear other leaders saying things like, just pick up the phone, right? And it's a little tough to do in Teams or Zoom or whatnot, but you can still do it. It's getting easier. But everybody feels like, I have to put a meeting on his calendar to talk to him. No, you don't. Like, just hit the little phone button. And if I can answer, I can answer. If I can't, I can't. I've also done small things to, again, lessen these barriers, break down these barriers. I'll just record like a 1-minute video and I'll send it across the chat and say, hey, Jessica, hope you're doing well. I had a couple questions. It's harder to put this in text or type it in an email, and you're going to miss all the nuance and context and facial expressions and body language. So I'm just going to ask this, and here's what I was thinking, and over to you it goes. And you watch it and you feel like we've actually had a conversation. It feels more of a connection. And then that allows you to approach the question or the challenge differently. Just small things like that, I feel, can be an opportunity to break down those barriers. And then the last thing I'll say here is these barriers will never solve themselves. We have to get creative. We have to get consistent, and we have to get clear. Because if we just sort of in a passive way say, well, I'll let the culture person take care of it, it's going to be far too late.
Yeah. Yeah. That in particular, I mean, I think that, what you were going back to your original use case with the agricultural, the farm ag, the fact that community and relationships were such a big part. And what you're describing here is meetings are getting in the way. AI is getting in the way. It's kind of deteriorating that relationship. So I love your, again, simple suggestions on how to overcome those barriers with a video. Like, so much of human communication does require seeing somebody, seeing those facial expressions, hearing the tone, and not interpreting it through email or some sort of written communication. So all of this is very, very tangible. One other thing that I think has stood out to me from your use case and maybe some of the potential barriers is just having a really clear, and what I think might contribute as a potential barrier is clarity on in terms of where you're going and getting rid of some of the noise. And it sounded like from your use case that everyone understood the objective and everyone was working towards that objective. And in the workplace, in today's workplace, and probably for decades now, there's a lot of competing priorities and competing objectives. And so I don't think we're doing ourselves any favors there either, right? When we've got this major transformation underway, or maybe multiple at the same time. And so this makes me think too that relationship, that community, that trust building is even more critical when you're trying to navigate multiple large scale changes, many day-to-day competing priorities. Would you agree with that? Or do you think there's maybe something else here that could help change leaders who are listening to this show, watching the podcast, think, okay, that all makes sense, but how do I do this when there's all these other things that are going on?
Yeah, I would. So first and foremost, I appreciate you naming that, which is there's so many competing priorities. And, digital transformation is something that people talk about, have been talking about for decades now. I think what's changed over time is we just keep putting more inside that bucket. So it hasn't slowed down, it's grown. But what it makes it different is there's just more bifurcation of what's inside there. And I think that causes, to your point, the context switching that we have to do across priorities, across programs and projects. I'm not going to say it lightly, it's killing us. It's literally atrophying our brain because we're constantly having to switch in the middle of something, chase this firefly, chase that firefly, whatever it is, just chase the thing that's coming across our screen. And what you're left with is a sense of, I didn't accomplish anything. When in fact, you probably did a little bit of everything, but you're left with a sense of, I didn't do anything. And that is a very, very debilitating experience and feeling and emotion, and it compounds loneliness. And that's where I feel like the workplace, I believe, has more of an obligation to do exactly what you talked about, which is set the vision. So if, Brene Brown has talked about this before, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. If we continue to tell people to run in a direction, but they don't know where they're running, they don't know why they're running, they don't know how far they're running, they don't know where the water stops are along the way, it's not going to be a good experience for anyone. And at some point, the leader is going to be at the finish line and say, where is everybody? Well, that's not how you motivate a group of people to do anything. If you climb a mountain and you happen to be the leader at the top of the mountain, you have a wider aperture. You can see what's coming. You can see in the distance. It is your duty to echo that down the mountain and tell people, hey, inclement weather's coming, bundle up. Or,
Right.
hey, I'm throwing you down some supplies. It's going to get windy. Hold on, right? That's your duty as a leader. And again, going back to the calendars are leading us, we're not leading our calendars. In the absence of carving out time to do that, what ends up happening is leaders say, I had the intention of telling Jessica this was happening, but I just didn't get around to it. Doesn't mean that leader's a bad person. It just means they got really busy. But regardless, Jessica felt overlooked. Jessica felt left out. And Jessica is the one carrying the burden of those feelings. And what that creates is animosity.
Yeah.
And that debilitates trust. So I appreciate you calling that out, because that's the reality of where organizations are right now. And I would encourage leaders to, look, yeah, go stand at the top of the mountain, but work on your echo, work on your call, work on your ability to bring people along, set that vision, and understand that we have to recast that many times. You'll have to paint that picture many times.
Yeah.
And that's just because we're going through so much change as individuals.
Yeah. Wow. I really love how you kind of walked us through that. And it makes it very clear that leadership is a responsibility. And, what you're describing, I think, is a mindset shift too, and a different way of leading that maybe we've also gotten away from over the years, because to your point, people are super busy. They just aren't thinking about it. It's not necessarily that they're a bad leader, but they haven't been intentional with their leadership and understood that responsibility. And I think, for better or worse, there's a lot of leaders who believe that if the team needs them, then they'll make that ask. If, they see the responsibility of the people that are on the team to bring that forward. And that doesn't happen often, because for a lot of different reasons. So what you're saying is, regardless of whatever those reasons are, that we need to, as leaders in an organization, get better at our echo. I love that. I want to soundbite that, because that is such an important takeaway from this. And I can see how all of the actions that you took with your original use case to working with your clients that you have now, they're lucky to have you on the team and be in that leadership role for them. And I have no doubt that they are seeing the benefit of the insights, perspective, and also just the heart that you have for this. That is so abundantly clear. And just being able to talk to you about this gives me motivation and inspiration to go try things in a different way, or keep trying the same things, but have a different, a fresh perspective on how to approach it. So, Bill, I'm so glad, again, so glad that you reached out, that we have this special episode to share with people. And I hope that, just like me, people who are listening and watching feel inspired, feel hopeful, feel responsible, and recognize that there is a better way forward. There is a way to experience transformation and bring people along and feel that sense of ownership. And then also do it all on time and within budget, and it's still successful. So you
Right.
have been just so helpful in that regard, and sharing how to go about this. I appreciate it. Is there any last words of wisdom for people who are tuning in? If people want to follow your work, I know you in your podcast. How can they find you, follow you, all the things?
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Yeah, well, certainly, last words of wisdom I would say is storytelling is a really powerful medium. And when it comes to change, this is how humans change, right? The power of storytelling. And so one thing I've done is I started this podcast almost a decade ago. I just released the 150th episode. So if people want to go back and listen to the stories of individuals going through change and evolving and growing, and many of them have had very successful stories to share, feel free to go and listen to the Coffee and Change podcast. It's on all your favorite podcast platforms. I'm also on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out. I do post and write there quite a bit. I write a lot on Substack now, probably more like creative writing and poetry that I put there. There's definitely a number of ways to get in touch with me, but I encourage people to reach out and share your story, right? That's part of the echo. That's why I love the opportunity to share with you today. I believe I was called to this work to lessen loneliness in the world. I know, and we think a lot about the accolades, the certificates, even the methodologies, but it's really not about that for me. For me, it's about lessening loneliness in the world, because if people are less lonely, then I believe they can take their next step and change whatever that is.
Oh my gosh.
That's how we're
Yeah.
wired.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. You're fantastic. Bill, thank you so much for sharing your light and wisdom with the Change Leader Insights community. I have subscribed to Coffee and Change. I'm going to go find you on Substack, and we're already connected on LinkedIn. So check. But I'll include that information in the show notes. Thank you again for your time. Keep doing the great work that you're doing and keep in touch. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, Jessica. Appreciate the time.